people, and using state power. It was never about withdrawing state power. It was always about using state power to create a good business climate. And that meant giving tax subsidies and all kinds of goodies to the corporations. I mean, you know, it's amazing. Corporations are supposed to be, you know, vigorous entrepreneurial institutions, but they always need a vast amount of state money to do what they do. So this is the neoliberal game that's coming out of it, with, however, some very significant features to it. The first is the neoliberal game was always about reconstituting class power. And the concentrations of class power that are now emerging are absolutely astonishing. You think in a depression that, well, okay, yeah, a few of the top guns get hurt, you know, and a few, you know, what's his name, Fold had to sell off his art collection or something like that. Poor guy. But actually, those who are left are really richer than ever. I mean, when I mentioned $3 billion in 1 year for Paulson and Soros et al., I mean, the concentrations of wealth on Wall Street, the bonuses which are just about to be declared on Wall Street at the end of this year are going to be humongous. I mean, there is this huge, and this is not only going on in this country. The number of billionaires in India doubled last year. The number of billionaires emerging in China is kind of, I mean, there is this huge concentration of wealth going on, which has been the long trend since the 1970s anyway. So that's becoming even more consolidated than ever before. So that's the second thing, however, is that we were always told over these last, 20, 30 years, Margaret Thatcher and everybody else always kind of said, well, a free market always produces a result which is to the benefit of all. Didn't Adam Smith say that, after all? I mean, Adam Smith only said it in one line. And again, careful about the one-liners. If you go read Adam Smith, it's much more complicated than that. And at some point or other, you find out he's very suspicious of a lot of the high bourgeoisie and what they're going to do with this. Now, but the legitimacy of the system has broken down. If only we would see it. If only we would stop having sand thrown in our eyes by tea parties and Fox News and all the rest of it, who kind of just, And I actually what gets me mad about this is not that they're doing what they're doing, but all of the other media are debating what they're doing. There was a US social forum in Detroit where 15,000 people came together to talk about an alternative. Did it ever get on any of the press anywhere? Did you ever see any accounts on it on MSNBC? Did you ever see any? No, you didn't see anything about it at all. They're so busy going on trying to ridicule the Tea Party, but by ridiculing, they actually emphasize their importance and their existence. You should ignore the bastards and keep them out of the way. We should be talking about the alternative, which then comes back to the whole kind of question of where's the resistance, where's the outrage, where's the organisation to say this shall not be? And this also gets back to something much broader, which is what forms of organisation can actually take up this kind of question of trying to do something in relationship to that compound growth that cannot go on forever for environmental and social and political and all kinds of other reasons. In other words, there's a huge kind of problem which needs to be addressed. And one of the things that it seemed to me very important was to sort of start to say, look, we have to think about that and start to articulate what the alternative might look like, some alternative might look like. And we have to actually think in organizational forms which are going to address the nature of the problems that we really face. But there is not, as it were, right now, the outrage there, and I think that this is one of the things that outrage has to be connected to analysis. In fact, the way in which outrage has been channeled into the Tea Party is is really extremely interesting, because it seems to me there has to be an alternative way to channel outrage into an outrage against capital. I mean, if you talk to the ordinary people in the Tea Party and say, are you in favour of the immense fortunes being built up on Wall Street? Are you in favour of the immense fortunes of those people who are funding almost everything? And are you in favour of Rupert Murdoch's immense fortunes and his power? The answer would be probably not. So how come, you're in this kind of political world? I mean, there's a thing here where we have to connect some analysis, but the analysis is not there either. And this is one of the things that I was really trying to remedy in the Enigma book, is to say, look, there is a way of creating an analysis of this, which talks about the dynamics, explains why this has been going on, not just simply now, but it's been going on for a long time. And there is a theory of crisis formation and crisis resolution which you can look at, and there's a history of it and a geography of it, which is explicable. And therefore, when we start to look at that, there's a way of taking that analysis and starting to incorporate it into an understanding of what the nature of the problem is. In exactly the same way that the economists, when they replied to Her Majesty, said we were not aware of systemic risk, we have a whole population that is totally unaware of the systemic qualities of what capitalism is about, and therefore cannot locate the problem in relationship to capitalism. And it's very interesting, where a lot of the preliminary surveys on those people who've lost their homes and been foreclosed, who do they blame? Themselves. Well, that's a good neoliberal trick. You know, personal responsibility. And to a degree, we've all become neoliberals now because we believe that crap. And we have to stop believing in it, and we have to actually say, you know, there's a systemic problem here. And the systemic problem requires systemic solutions. And there's absolutely no attempt to do so, in part because the politics of this country are completely dominated by what I call the Party of Wall Street, which is as deeply implanted in the Democratic Party as it is in the Republican Party. And the Party of Wall Street effectively dominates discourse and dominates the political process. And therefore, most of us are unrepresented in terms of our wants, needs, and desires. And that is one of the things that needs to be remedied. Now, the other thing is there are, of course, many, many movements around, all over the place. And one of the things I did at the end of the book is to start to talk about them, you know. You know, there's an autonomista movement, there's an anarchist movement, there are the traditional kind of left, you know, revolutionary communist parties, there are the NGOs, there are all these sorts of configurations. And when you look at it, you see a sort of a chaos of movements, many of which are extremely conflictual, and many of which have certain commitments to organizational forms. And one of the criticisms I would end up with, and I didn't say this as explicitly as I should have done, because I've been criticized for what I wrote in that chapter, and I've now decided, well, I better counterattack. And the main line of counterattack is to say, look, I think there's a fetishism of organizational form out there. There are groups out there who kind of say, the only organizational form is one that is democratic and horizontal. And you kind of say, yeah, fine, okay, how are you going to deal with global warming that way? How are you going to deal with, you know, sort of major problems of SARS epidemics or something like that way? Don't you understand that actually in order to do that you need to actually contemplate that you need hierarchies somewhere in the thing? You can try and democratize the hierarchies, but imagine that, you know, the other extreme, you find yourself, you know, talking with the Revolutionary Communist Party who insist on as a vanguard party, and it has to be the proletariat in motion. And you kind of say, well, you know, the proletariat has changed. It's not where you think it is. And the whole concept of the proletariat needs to be, you know, rejigged and changed. And I've always had a problem, actually, with the Marxist definition of the proletariat, because, you know, it's always about factory labor, and I'm always interested in cities. And I kind of say, well, the workers who build cities are as important in this as the workers in the factories. And actually, if you look at revolutions like the Paris Commune and all those kinds of things, who was involved in it? Well, it wasn't factory labor, it was many of the workers building the cities. And actually, it was so interesting. The first two measures of the Paris Commune, one was suspension of night work in the bakeries, which is a labor question. The other was moratorium on rents, which is a living place question. And I kind of say, well, you know, the unity of those two is absolutely fundamental. So a revolutionary movement has to be actually prepared to think about all those forms of labor which are now not being, you know, difficult to represent and difficult to organize. I mean, we work a little bit with Right to the City stuff in New York, and, you know, groups in New York, for instance, domestic workers. How do domestic workers get organized? And what's that all about? And can you use a sort of traditional, you know, National Labor Relations Board kind of model of organizing? No, of course you can't. So you have to think about doing something radically different in terms of the mobilization of populations. And therefore, one of the things we need to do, and I think from all organizational perspectives, is to sit back and say, how good is my organizational form in relationship to the nature of the problem which we need to address? And just by asking that question, get a little bit more flexible instead of kind of saying, you have to be my organizational form or I'm not going to talk to you. I mean, I get, a lot of that. People don't like what I said about their organizational form. I'm critical of all of them to a little bit. I'm supportive of all of them and critical. But no, if you're a little bit critical of them, no, you're the enemy. You're a secret Stalinist or you're a secret something else. I mean, amazing the words you get from the left as soon as you depart from their favored organizational form, I can tell you. But it is a fetishism of organizational form. And it's like kind of pretending you can solve the problems of a heart attack by, I don't know, putting somebody's finger in a splint. I mean, it's just about as so the left has to actually start to think about what it is doing and why it's doing it and the way it's doing it. And there's a certain urgency, I think, to this task. Because we are going to come out of this crisis in capitalist terms, in other words. And the capitalist terms are much greater concentrations of wealth and power, almost a dictatorship of the world's central bankers, and a political system that is so corrupt. I mean, who looking at this election can say this is not a totally corrupt, and it's legalized corruption. That's the terrible thing about it. It's legalized corruption of democracy. And there has to be something radically different in terms of organizational form and the like. So what I was trying to do was to come up with the analysis and then try to talk a little bit about both the geography and the dynamics of it, and then also to talk through some of the organizational forms and really make a plea for starting to think about the relationship between organizational forms and the nature of the task that really now confronts us. Because we either come out of it on their terms or we come out of it on our terms. And there's no excuse, it seems to me, for sitting here passively and say, I don't know what my terms are. You have to find out what your terms are, and you have to think about, what the organizational form is going to be. Well, I talked for long enough, so thanks very much. I think we have half an hour for discussion, I think.
Right, we've got about 30 minutes. We don't have microphones circulating, so if you have a question, please be succinct and very clear and loud. And David's going to field his own questions. As I said, we do have to stop exactly at 8:30.
I'm going to take them in a bunch of threes. I can just about remember three. So, yeah, 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Is capitalism in crisis, or is it not? That is, it is a diminishing rate of profit. It's been a continuous crisis over the last 2 generations at least. Then how can it be that the accumulation of wealth in the hands of the few accelerates all the more, and the power of capital over labor increases? Is it triumphant, or is it in crisis?
So there were two here. Okay.
Marx had concentrated on technological evolution in some of his analysis, and more recent work has looked at technologies as new combinations of existing technologies, suggesting that there's a combinatorial expansion in potential technologies, meaning that a exponential increase in dematerialized wealth is certainly a possibility. So I wondered if you could comment on the technological advance.
This is a question relating to sort of the idea that since 1970 we've had sort of a global crisis for labor. When we look at Marx, he's concerned primarily with human emancipation and the role of alienation in labor.
Mm-hmm.
Given that that's not a problem that was resolved in the 70s, and that the expansion of global wealth has brought a tremendous improvement in living standards in the third world, could we not see sort of the movements of global capital since 1970 as an emancipatory project, if that one-sidedly because of the nature of capital?
Okay, let me combine the first two questions.